On behalf of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, I would like to welcome you all to our We Have a Dream 2020 event. Just some logistics at the start. I would just like to ask everybody to silence their cell phones as we have a long list of great speakers and we want to make sure that everybody gets to hear what they have to say. I have been asked to sort of introduce the committee to you and what we stand for, and I couldn't find a better way to do it than sort of explain our name and what the words mean to us. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what DEI Committee stands for. So to start with diversity, diversity speaks to the many differences that we have, whether that's racial, gender, sexual orientation, physical abilities. Our committee recognizes these differences, and we recognize that no characteristic is superior to any other. Many times when I hear people speak of diversity, I hear them say, I'm not a diverse person, which always confuses me because diversity is an adjective that describes a group of people. No single person can be diverse or undiverse. It's true that in order to have a diverse group, you can't do that without without underrepresented groups, but you also can't do it without traditionally overrepresented groups. So we just want everyone to know and understand that when we speak of diversity, it means everybody. As far as equity, at the founding of our nation, we were promised that all men would be created equal. And yet, at the beginning of our nation, black people were considered 3/5 of a person, and women were not even mentioned as equal. Our committee recognizes that some groups have traditionally been not given the opportunities that others have. And we seek to eliminate any inequities for any group. And inclusion. Inclusion is my favorite word because of the three. Because you can't track inclusion with statistics like you can equity. You can't create laws to increase inclusion. Inclusion is a feeling. Inclusion is the feeling you get when you know that you belong. And if you live in an inclusive community, everybody understands that we value equity and we celebrate diversity. And just to end, the last word I want to speak about is the word dream, which you're going to hear a lot about tonight. Our country has a long history with the word dream. For instance, in the Harlem Renaissance, the great poet Langston Hughes wrote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and run?" During the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Even today, the children of undocumented immigrants refer to themselves collectively as the Dreamers, and their parents brought them here so that they might have a chance at the American dream. As I read the dictionary definition of dream, it's described as a noun. But when I look back at the Harlem Renaissance and the Civil Rights Movement, and even the Dreamers of today, they don't treat the word dream like a noun. They treat it like a verb, because they understand that without action, their dreams might never be realized. If the suffragettes had dreamed passively, women might still be disenfranchised today. If Martin Luther King Jr. had dreamed passively, our schools might still be segregated today. Progress is not inevitable. It takes work and hard work, and not just by the many great leaders that you will hear today. It requires work from all of us. If we have a dream in 2020, it should be to set an example for the next generation. They will inevitably be faced with challenges of their own, whether that be the negative effects of climate change or perhaps another world war. We should show them that when you're faced with the deadliest pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the largest demonstration of civil unrest since the Civil Rights Movement, that you respond by standing up and trying to create the world you want to live in. This is what the DEI Committee stands for, and we hope that you stand up with us and fight to create the world you want to live in. We want this event to inspire you. We have an impressive list of speakers, and I'm honored to be able to introduce them to you. Our first speaker is the Reverend Dr. Claudia Highball, and I want you all to join me in welcoming her up to speak. Thank you.
This evening we are gathered to remember the work that has been done to push our nation to justice and equality. There's something still for all of us to do, some way to engage, to work, to create justice in our nation. We are all made of visions and dreams, but with these fantastical works of mind and spirit come the requirement with mountaintop visions of on-the-ground work, community building, armies of marching, demonstrating folks, taking hold of the resources that make for justice. This evening we celebrate and remember the dream and think about the work there is still to do. Years ago, I grew up in the midst of the early civil rights movement. My ministry and my work and my education come as a result of a childhood commitment to a variety of academic communities that taught me to always think and work for justice. I still work for change and the creation of ways for all of us as human beings and citizens to deal justly with one another. I live in the mind of the movement, the old movement, that demands respect for human rights and the rights of all people to participate fully in our economic and political systems, providing access to health and education for all people, and surrounding all of us with, across ages and generations, with a sound, safe, and fair legal system. Now, you may think, for example, that you know the basis of this from the I Have a Dream speech, the oratory given by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, August 28, 1963. But have you ever read the whole speech? Have you ever looked at it? Do you know what happens when a dream lives in your head and not in the active movement of your brain and your feet? Listen to this early part of the speech from Dr. King. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro need to blow off steam and will be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will neither be rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted civil rights and citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of this nation until the bright day of justice emerges. So today, generations and decades later, we are still living out that rude awakening. Having lived myself through the late 50s and early 60s as a child and young person, the early movement formed the basis of my own social and psychological development alongside the values of my family and my faith community. All of the events of the civil rights movement, the demonstrations of the 60s informed me and my peers of the determination in our determination of the dangers, inequities, complications, injustices, and corruption of life in these United States. Now, currently, I've been hanging out with people who are younger than me, and they keep telling me that across the United States of America, they have never seen, nor has there ever been, lived out in public the ways that we do now, the kind of violence that we're currently experiencing. And that all of this is happening for the very first time in the era of social media. Let me just share with you. I turned 13 in 1963, the year that Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in public on television. It was a global event. I saw the assassinations of Malcolm X, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy in public on television. These were all global events. In 1970, this was a year when I was in college, that America broadcasted the murders of college students in Kent and Jackson State universities by the National Guard. In public, on television. These were global events. I, for one, am shaped and formed from the earliest days of my adolescence by a violence that binds youthful innocence over to the reality of struggle and oppression in a world of deep injustice and evil. The life and work and faith of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are part and parcel of the text of my life and learning. I grew up in a world of deeply rooted racism and discrimination. And just for those of you that don't know, I grew up in a place called Chicago. And how in the world people say they've never seen violence when Chicago's been around for so long, I don't know. I want to invite you to remember the work and words of Dr. King and his colleagues, his movement members who were women and children who sacrificed life and limb to bring us to where we are today. Remember, incite your own participation and your willing worker spirit as we commit to keep faith, hope, and justice as a part of our life and work together. The dream continues with lockstep, the lockstep commitment of our feet on the ground. We march, speak, and vote for change. The truth of the movement and continued engagement lies not only in the voice of that one great orator, but as well in the lives and commitments of those inspired to follow along in the great procession of the movement. We should all follow behind them, step up, fall in line behind the dreamers and the organizers. Violence and terror in this country actually form the foundation of who we are. From the beginning, Africans were captured and stolen to this country. They were bound together in the Middle Passage, strapped in the bows and bottoms of ships, confused and congested in darkness and filth, starved, bound, beaten, abused, raped. The ancestors of African Americans came here not searching for freedom and liberty, but stolen from it, do not forget. They were not immigrants or migrants. They were not dreamers looking for freedom, but rather tribes and races of people robbed of their liberty to create a nation bound to instill injustice. The I Have a Dream oratory offered by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on that sunny day in Washington, D.C. in 1963 exploded words of hope and momentum. This is the way the Black community unites, connects, objects, and moves forward boldly with voice and spirit, working around the indulgence of violence and hate. The civil rights movement of the '60s to the streets and the media for the first time showed the world a global view of faces, voices, bodies, and movement, and determined witness for generations of the evil, violent obstruction of justice for too many of the people for too much time. King's mission for justice in the United States of America, as you know, started in Montgomery, Alabama in December of 1955. There, in the streets of that city that would deny and defy freedom, equality, or justice to the serving class, began what came to be known as the Montgomery bus boycott. Deep in the heart of an urban community, the walk to freedom and justice began again in public. This evening, it is the easiest thing for us to remember or rehearse or regret the dissipation of generations of the old dream of liberty and justice for all. We must continue while we remember the march. Stand up behind the powerful, creative, resourceful, angry young Black women and mothers of Black Lives Matter who defy the ugliness and evil of the violence in our streets. Organize the vote right here in Groton. Get people out and out to express their right to just right here vote on our sacred ground. And get behind the powerful witness and voice of Brian Stevenson, for example, still walking the walk in the streets of Montgomery across the decades-old path of righteousness and justice. In the work of his Equal Justice Initiative, Stevenson's core purpose is to confront the injustices of the legal system, reviewing and releasing prisoners who serve time for crimes they have not committed, confronting the system, the prison system, and the excessive abuses of incarceration. The EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, motivates good citizens to know the truth about slavery, lynching, incarceration, and the legally just, unjust system of the United States of America. Stevenson's team of volunteers, activists, lawyers, and students offer the EJI as a progressive space for learning and change. The workers there are mostly young people under 35, committed to teaching truth and making justice fit the generations' long, active moments of dreams to a just reality. So these are Stevenson's kind of code words for making justice. First, get proximate. Learn what the challenges are in your community. Get next to it. Stand up close. Read, study, put on your gloves, and get to work. Second, change the narrative. This is probably my favorite. We do not know, hear, learn, or teach the truth about the history of our country or the economic foundations of our political system. Our very origins, the very basis of our origins as a country, are based in hate, racism, apartheid, sexism, and many other kinds of exclusion. Many of us were never, ever, ever, ever meant to be equal citizens in these United States of America. Learn the truth. Tell the truth. Live the truth. Speak the truth. Next, live, work, and fight against hopelessness. Hope is what gets you to speak when other people say, be quiet. And finally, get uncomfortable. You've heard that old indigenous people's comment, walk a mile in my shoes. We know that everybody is uncomfortable right now. Everybody is working hard to make all of us find a way of comfort and healing and health and safety. We ought all to work out life considering how to give everyone their basic needs. Then get up and walk away from disconnection, ignorance, and the dismissal of the other, and learn justice for all, not justice for the rich, the powerful, the male, the heterosexual, or the political representative, for example. I am old and tired and worn out. I am slow and laboring in my movements. Frankly, I don't get social media. I do not have a lifetime of possibility and opportunities ahead of me, but I have decided to stay awake a bit longer. Do not grieve the loss of any of our dreams. In this season of protection and care for our whole community, put on some gloves, get some tools, mask yourself with purpose, grab the folks around you, old and young, the confused and the self-confident, and get to work.
Thank you, Reverend, for that. Next, we have Ricarla Horsley from the St. John's Christian Church, and she will be singing Power in Prayer by 11th Hour.
That was wonderful. The song is Power in Prayer. I know it's not, I've heard my pastor say it. I don't know who actually came up with the quote, but I've heard it said when something is extremely evident that even Ray Charles can see it. And there's, you know, the state of our country and our world right now it's very evident that we're in desperate need of prayer. And I can attest that there certainly is power in prayer. So I thought this song would be applicable. Some just see someone down on their knees, talking to the air, words lost on a breeze. Some just see teardrops falling to the floor, just a waste of time, not anything more, but it's a direct line to the throne room, where you can find someone who cares. And if you need some proof, I can tell you there is power in prayer. I can tell you about a time the Lord gave me peace with trouble around. He calmed the storm in me. And I remember when I cried out, He saved my soul. Some may have the doubt, but I know that I know that I knew it's a direct line to the throne room.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Like that's you can always tell when it's a live production, I guess. Next, we have Pastor Coleman from the St. John's Christian Church.
Did I turn it on?
Is it on? Is it on? Yeah. All right. First of all, I'm honored to be here. Yeah. All right. First of all, it's an honor to be here with you this evening. And I thank God for the opportunity to speak before you. I thank God for the young lady, the minister, that she's retired. Now I got to come behind her and Ricky, who just got finished singing. Let me find my glasses and get myself together. We're talking about Dr. King's dream. The dream lives on through me. Can I take this out? Sure. Thank you. The dream lives on through me. One of the most famous speeches of all time was delivered by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on August the 28th, 1963, at the March on Washington in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The I Had a Dream speech was simply about equality and freedom. It was spoken on behalf of an African American for all minorities who felt that they were not given a fair deal. It would be fitting of the location since President Lincoln had issued an executive order on September 22nd, 1862, in the middle of the Civil War, called Emancipation Proclamation, which states on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the person thereof should be in rebellion against the United States, should be henceforth and forevermore free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military, the naval authority, therefore will recognize and maintain the freedom of such person. It will not act to repress such a person or any of them in any effect that they may for their actual freedom. The Civil War started because of a disagreement between the North and the South. The North felt that slaves should be free, and the South wanted to keep slavery in place because they depended on slave wage labor for income. The value of a black man wasn't because he was looked upon as a human being, but rather because he was necessary to the slave owner economy, especially in the South. We were looked upon as if we were a machine in what we could produce. This is why many blacks today still feel that respiration should be paid because of what happened in the South. Yet, 150 years later, Black American, other minorities are still fighting for the basic human rights as detailed in the Declaration of Independence, which states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." Black America, and especially Native America, feel that they were excluded from this declaration. We have never felt equal because we were never treated as such. If that was the case, then the Emancipation Proclamation was given, there would be no need for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Affirmative action and other laws that were put in effect to make us feel like we were valuable, I would come to realize that they are fictions in our society. They are those who are intimidated by the unknown, or just simply because someone is different than they are. In other words, white, especially Southern whites, were threatened by who they perceived us to be without taking the opportunity to get to know us, who we are as a person. But at the same time, they knew how strong we were, but how hard we worked for them. So as long as we did not know how important, how valuable we were, we would maintain the slave mentality. The color of my skin keeps me from being accepted as part of the human race. But at the end of the day, whether you are black, white, red, yellow, or brown, we all bleed the same blood. When we breathe, it's the same oxygen. When we cry, our tears flow down our cheeks like anybody else. When we suffer a loss, our hearts are in pain too. We must come to some conclusion that in order for Dr. King's dream to come true, it has to live through you and I. As a pastor, the realization is that we cannot pass any more new laws, make up any new decrees, or come up with any new regulation in order to ensure that everybody shares the same equality, justice, and freedom for all, regardless of color, nationality, race, or creed. The truth, in order for things to change, a change has to begin in one's own mind, and then it can penetrate in one's heart. I, as an individual, must first admit that I have problems before a change can take place. Once I acknowledge that I have a problem, then and only then can change begin. You see, racism is what blocks equality, justice, and freedom for all. Blacks and other minorities are not asking for special treatment, but an equal opportunity. We're not asking for to go to the head of the line, but rather a seat at the table. Neither are we asking for a pass, but for a fair shake. God is the answer for what is wrong with the human condition. If we continue to leave him out of the equation, we will always come back to square one. So I will continue to allow the dream to live through me by praying to God according to 2 Chronicles 7:14, which says, "If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray, seek my face, and then turn from their wicked ways, then we will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and will heal the land." We have to look past each other's faults and see the need for each other's change. It starts with each person, and it will take all of us as a nation for this change to come. Think about it. 4 years ago, Kaepernick took a knee protesting against police brutality. Who would have thought that on May the 25th of this year, when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis on live camera, that only this nation and the entire world would erupt with outrage? Dr. King once wrote that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Prior to that, it was the death of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Earl Gardner, Breonna Taylor, and just the list goes on and on. But unlike the protests that occurred afterward, this time it would be different. You have every race, nationality, and creed protesting the senseless killing of a human being. Dr. King stated in his dream speech, the marvelous new military which was engulfed the Negro community must lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up in my destiny. He goes on to say, we cannot walk alone. George Floyd's death impacted the world, and we said with one voice through the protesters that we will not stand for the injustice any longer. The wrong is, and we demand justice. Yes, he was a black man, but first, he was a human being. I believe this is what the focus was on during the protest. Maybe because of corona pandemic, with more people at home watching TV, is why George Floyd's death impacted the whole world. We all witnessed this horrible event together. I attest protests held here in Groton and New London is what impressed me the most, was seeing all the young people taking part in something that touched us all. We say that our youth are the future, but I give a small glimpse of what our youth are capable of that provides me with a great hope of the future of our community and with our nation as a whole. When I saw what was going on with the young, white, black, Spanish, down there in New London and Groton, it really brought tears to my eyes because I marched back in the 60s and the 70s, but this is different. And them young people have a movement, and I praise God that their movement is for equality for everybody. Dr. King once stated, one day, right here in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. And this was truly witnessed in the protests I saw in this nation and around the world. Pandora's box has now been opened wide to the injustice that has been taking place and is happening now. This is the dawn of a new day for our nation. Can no longer keep silent or cover our eyes or look the other way. We are now required of each other to say something if we see something crooked in order to make it straight. Many years ago, we allowed one woman to take prayer out of school. Let us not allow anyone to take prayer out of our nation. We have a God-given right and a duty to keep the dream alive, so that one day we'll all be able to say together with one voice, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. And again, thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah.
Grandma, if you need it.
Thank you. When you get old, you gotta hold on to something. Did I bring my mask? I put it in my pocket. Okay, I put it in my pocket.
Our next speaker is the inaugural poet laureate for the city of Hartford and a professor of English at Three Rivers Community College. Please help me in welcoming Professor Frederick Knowles II.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. How are you?
I'd like to thank the Groton Equity Inclusion Committee for inviting me to share this day with you. I'm going to share some things with you. This speech is titled Heru the King. And I'm going to begin with a question in which I would like for you to ponder during this speech. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? In ancient Kemet U, also known as Egyptology, the cornerstone for all world religions, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, there is the spiritual principle of Ma'at. Ma'at represents truth, justice, and the harmonious balance of the universe. According to Ma'at, in the day of your judgment, your heart, the symbol of intellect and will, is weighed on a scale against a feather. If your heart is heavier than the feather, you will be sent to Amamet, the devourer of souls. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you are deemed the vindicated one, hence the phrase, light as a feather. Within Kemet U, there are deities, or divine beings. One such deity is called Heru. Heru is the great avenger of injustice. You may know him as Hero. In our modern time, there is no other person that represents the supreme characteristics of Heru, such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., born January 15, 1929, and assassinated April 4, 1968. Dr. King spent his entire life as the great avenger of injustice. Now, we all may or may not be all too familiar with his monumental speech, I Have a Dream. The speech that harpooned the Moby Dick of racism lurking in the dark oceans of the United States. The speech this event is centered around. However, there is another speech, another cornerstone in the legacy of Dr. King that I would like to address. On December 11, 1964, King delivered his Nobel Peace Prize speech at the University of Oslo, titled The World House. The speech was published in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? In the World House, Dr. King calls upon humanity to do 4 things. 1, transcend tribe, race, class, nation, and religion to embrace the vision of a world house. 2, eradicate at home and globally the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. 3, curb excessive materialism and shift from a thing-oriented society to a people-oriented society. And 4, resist social injustice and resolve conflicts in the spirit of love embodied in the philosophy of nonviolence. I would like to share with you 3 quotes from the World House that will embody the legacy of Heru, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in relevance to our modern societal ills. 1, quote, every man lives in 2 realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. End quote. Here, King argues that we have lost sight with our internal selves and fully identify through the external, which inadvertently clouds us from taking a long look at the man in the mirror. King analyzed the story of Rip Van Winkle, stating that when Van Winkle went up in the hills to sleep, there was a sign hailing the name King George. When he awoke 20 years later, the sign said George Washington. The story is not that Van Winkle slept for 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. As Americans, we are choosing to sleep. As Americans, are we choosing to sleep through a national and global revolution? If so, why? What fear-mongering immersed in the zeitgeist of our society causes us to continuously push the snooze button on the internal clock of our souls? What are we truly afraid of? Can we afford to sleep another 20 years? Many are familiar with the phrase, stay woke. Though, in order to stay woke, we first must awaken. 2, quote, another grave problem that must be solved if we are to live creatively in our world house is that of poverty on an international scale. Like a monstrous octopus, it stretches its choking prehensile tentacles into lands and villages all over the world. 2/3 of the people of the world go to bed hungry at night. They are undernourished, ill-housed, and shabbily clad. Many of them have no houses or beds to sleep in. Their only beds are the sidewalks of the cities and the dusty roads of the villages. Most of these poverty-stricken children of God have never seen a physician or a dentist. Dr. Curtly Mather, a Harvard geologist, asked, why should there be hunger and privation in any land, in any city, at any table, when man has the resources and the scientific know-how to provide all mankind with the basic necessities of life? The time has come for an all-out war against poverty. I ask you, why is there not a simple answer to such a simple question? Why do we allow children to starve? Isn't a hero supposed to be the protector of all within its metropolis? As a hero, are we not the arch nemesis of poverty? If we do not speak out and support those with action, then our inability identifies us as an ally of poverty rather than an antidote. King states, quote, the first step in the worldwide war against poverty is passionate commitment. If they, the wealthy nations, would allocate just 2% of their gross national product annually for a period of 10 or 20 years for the development of the underdeveloped nations, mankind would go a long way toward conquering the ancient enemy, poverty. End quote. There has been recent proof in our nation to warrant King's predilection. Since the inception of the COVID-19 pandemic, our nation, as well as many others, has undergone an economic collapse, leaving many without the means to provide sustenance for their families. We have witnessed the heroes, the heroes, and countless communities step up to cull the beast of poverty and disease. I truly hope that once our economy regains its fortitude, that we will not forget about our first responders and our fellow citizens who are and still will be in need of food, water, shelter, education, and an opportunity with financial literacy to provide for their families. 3, quote, a final problem that mankind must solve in order to survive in the world house that we have inherited is finding an alternative to war and human destruction. The question now is, do we have the morality and courage required to live together as brothers and not be afraid? So when in this day I see the leaders of nations again talking peace while preparing for war, I take fearful pause. When I see our country today intervening in what is basically a civil war, mutilating hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese children with napalm, burning villages and rice fields at random, painting the valleys of that small Asian country red with human blood, leaving broken bodies in countless ditches and sending home half men, mutilated mentally and physically. When I see the unwillingness of our government to create the atmosphere for a negotiated settlement of this awful conflict by halting bombings in the north and agreeing unequivocally to talk with the Viet Cong, and all this in the name of pursuing the goal of peace, I tremble for our world. End quote. I too tremble for our world. I tremble for our nation when the human destruction of unarmed young men and women of color are smitten on the battlefield of our streets, causing them to burn and become militarized. For let me be clear, in no means do I support the actions of anyone who willingly violates our nation's laws or the peaceful citizens who abide by them. I am asserting that our nation's cornerstone guarantees each citizen his constitutional rights. If he is a monster, let him be labeled as one and exiled from the haven of our communities. There are 3 branches of government: legislative, judicial, and executive. When the executive unlawfully abuses her position of power while simultaneously assuming her sister judicial's role, circumventing habeas corpus, hiding behind a blue shield of silence, a legion of doom descends onto the streets of our metropolis. Not all blue is black at their core, though if the black is not pruned from the blue, then the entire branch appears to poison the tree of life. Why do we continue to ingest poisonous apples even when they are rotted to their core? A larger question is, why does society hate my complexion so vehemently? What have I done to make you detest me so? Why are you killing us and letting others of European descent who are accused of the same crimes live to see their day in court? What have the black and brown people of this metropolis done that warrants such ill regard of life? In the philosophical phrase of comedian Cat Williams, don't worry, I'll wait. If a person's moral character is an antagonist to our society, let the halls of the Justice League see fit to deem them accountable for their actions, not an executive executioner of the law. in ancient Kemet U, Haru, the great avenger of injustice, was the hero of his time. It was him who helped put an end to chaos in the world and foil the plan of Set, the deity of darkness. Hence the phrase sun set. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Haru of our era, no longer walks upon the valleys of this realm. He no longer sings his sweet psalms into the lobes of the masses. He no longer can ascend the pulpit and crush the ills of injustice with his gallant weapon, his tongue, which was mightier than the sword. So I ask you again, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Awaken the Haru within you and continue to avenge social injustice and carry forth the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you.
Our next speaker is not only a member of the NAACP, but also a member of our very own DEI committee. Please welcome my friend, Juliet Parker.
Good eve. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go back. There were a series of events that led to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech in Washington at the Lincoln Memorial. In 1941, labor leader A. Philip Randolph called for a march to highlight the exclusion of African Americans from roles in national defense. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Ed unanimously ruled that racial segregation was unconstitutional. In August of 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, was murdered. His murderers were acquitted, and this brought international attention to the civil rights movement. In December of the same year, Rosa Parks did not give up her seat, which sparked a year-long boycott. In 1957, the Little Rock Nine were prohibited from integrating into school system. President Eisenhower sent in federal troops to escort them. In 1961, Freedom Riders protested segregated bus terminals and restrooms and the lunch counters. In April of 1963, Dr. King helped lead the Birmingham campaign, the desegregation effort. He was arrested and wrote the letter from Birmingham jail. In the same year, August, the March on Washington happened, where he did his speech for I Have a Dream, which was delivered to over 250,000 people. The main points: it left the door open for a continual journey of racial progress. It portrayed racial inequality. Dr. King called for civil and economic rights and an end to racism. It brought greater attention to the civil rights movement. Is there work still to be done? Yes. We need to come together as people who understand that we are all different and have different opinions. Need to have respect for each other and need to work together and find common ground. Need to listen and be silent and know when the time is right to move forward. When we rush forward and not have all the information or facts, we tend to lose focus on what the actual goal is. And that is to have equal ground. When we have different mindsets, we can have discussions to find that common ground. We just have to be willing to listen and compromise. In these times, pain and anger is understandable. What we do need to change is the anger and the pain. And we have to figure out how to move it forward. How do we come together and find the way to move forward? One way is to find different people to come to the table so that we can work on the issues. We cannot grow if we don't give each other a chance or respect. We must work together to find solutions. Does it take time? Yes. Yes, we have a history of incidents where all groups have tried to move forward. And yes, there are setbacks. We all need to learn from our full history, the good and the bad, so that the same mistakes are not being made. When we understand each other's perspectives and are again willing to listen, we can move forward. We need to find groups that promote racial equality. As a member of the local chapter of the NAACP in New London, the mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons, and to eliminate race-based discrimination. The overall mission is one nation, one dream. I believe we all can agree with that as it ties into today's event today. We have a dream 2020, which came together through the DEI Committee, where the committee has many people from diverse backgrounds that collaboratively work together to celebrate Groton's diversity. I say all this because I honestly believe that in order to move forward, we also have to look back and learn our history to overcome the racial divide. Not only the racial divide, it's your heart. We got to move forward, and I want to thank the team that put this together, did a wonderful job, and I'm glad to be working with them.
Our next speaker is the founder of Formerly Inc., an organization that teaches people to get out and stay out of prison. Please welcome Daryl McGraw.
How we doing? Hold on, how we doing? We all right? We good? Y'all in here? Okay, because I came to turn up a little bit. I know we're in the library. We ain't going to be that quiet, though. Y'all should have told me that the pastor was going to be here. I had to change my whole speech in the back. But it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm humbled. Those of you that don't know my story, my name is Daryl McGraw. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I spent 10 years of my life in and out of the prison system on the installment plan. Today, I'm here speaking to you. That's what I'm saying. So, I'm only going to be a few minutes because, you know, I know we only got a short amount of time, but this is a serious issue, and I'm glad that we're here. You know, we are very fortunate in this community, New London, Groton, Norwich, because you see the unity. Since I came from Stamford, Connecticut, the west side. And it wasn't that mixture of black and white. But here we see it. We see it all the time in the grocery stores. You see it here. We are inclusive. We got some issues, but we are inclusive. So I just want to say that we see so much going on in the country, and we're watching the news. We're watching cities burn down, and we're watching all this chaos. Yet here, we're kind of cool. We chilling. We're all together, right? So just because that does not mean that is not our issue. We just choose to respond to the crisis in a different way. So I will start with saying some quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King, which is an honor on this day, the day that he had a dream, because his dream allows me to stand here today, right? So racial injustice is still a black man's burden. Racial injustice is still a black man's burden and a white man's shame. This still goes on today. The fact that we have to say Black Lives Matter is crazy. The fact that we have to even discuss that is shameful, right? Y'all with me? Y'all still here? See, I'm used to being on some Zooms because of the current situation, so I'm used to so now when I got here, they let me out the house. I want to make sure I'm with y'all because, I got to wait. There's usually lag and stuff, so clap, tell me something, make me feel good. Let me know we in the building. Let them hear that we doing it out here in Groton. Let's go. Okay, I'm making sure. Okay, thank you. Jeez, thought I was on Zoom again. I'm like, man, what's up with that lag? So see, they asked me to pick out some of the things, and there's so much that the Dr. King had said, so I just want to hit you with a few, and some of them had already been said. That's what happens when you're the last speaker or one of the last speakers. People say all your stuff, but it's always relevant to say it again. That's how key those words were, when you can hear them again and let them resonate, because we want you to leave here. As the pastor said, that dream, we are now, each and every one of you, everybody sitting here is now a dream carrier. You have been chosen to carry the dream. We cannot let the dream die. Don't take the mask and not do something in your community. You are now a dream carrier. We are dream carriers. One time, I am a dream carrier. They can't hear you. They can't hear you. Let's go. We all right? I see Cindy over there looking at that clock. I got you. So one of the things, I picked out a few things and just follow me along. And these were, that resonated with me from Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. We have also come to this hollow spot to remind America the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Now. We got now. You know how you used to play in the yard and you play basketball and say, I got next? We got now. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valleys of segregation to sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Come on, man. Y'all still in the building? We good? Okay. Now is the time to make justice a reality for God's children. I didn't say that. Dr. King said it, but I know the pastor appreciate that I popped that in there. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. These words were written in 1963, but they really resonate right now. Right now. Let me say that again. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. The sweltering summer of the Negroes' legitimate discontent will not pass until the invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not the end. It was not the end. He said at the time it was the beginning. So as the brother Fred said, where are we now? as a community? Where are we now? Are you just attending the Black Lives Matter movements to say you went, or are you engaging in making a movement, meeting people so you can move forward? Don't just go to the march, meet somebody. I tell my black friends, how many white people did you meet at the march? Oh, well, I didn't meet anybody. Oh, but it was 3,000 people there. Well, I didn't meet anybody. Then I say to my white friends, how many black people did, well, we just went to the march and then we got Starbucks. No, it's not the way it works. Stop showing up at the march and not engaging in making community. You just can't go to the march. You can't just go to the march. You got to bring people home. Because if you're an accountant, I want you to come to the black community and teach financial wellness. And if you are a cook, I want you to go to the suburbs and teach them how to make soul food. Oh, y'all didn't hear me. Y'all ain't like that? We talking about seasoning. We talking about seasoning. We talking about collard greens. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And those hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam. And those who hope the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content, have a rude awakening. If the nation returns to business as usual, we are not going back to business as usual, not in New London, not in Southeastern County. We will not do that. If we have to show the world we are the movement, we will be the example. And there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted citizenship rights. Amen. Oh, y'all heard that? The mic working? The whirlwind of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of the nation until the bright day of justice emerges. I'm getting to the closer. I got you. Where's Cindy at? I know she's going to pull me off the stage. I just want to say I'm humbled and I thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for getting in your car and your willingness to come out here for this cause. Because this is a we thing, not a me thing. Mic's working. The mic is working. And I'm on my way. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads to the palace of justice. In the process of gaining the rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy the thirst of freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We got to stop that. We got to stop that. We can't rock like that. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow the creative protests to denigrate our physical violence, into physical violence, my bad, physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights, meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy has engulfed the Negro community, must lead us, this is key, must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up in our destiny. We didn't come to play no games. We didn't come to play no games. You invite me, we playing for real. I was a street dude. I'm a street dude. So I don't know how to do anything calm. I turn up wherever I'm going. And they have come to realize that their freedom, bound to our freedom, we cannot walk alone. The pastor said that, and I was like, oh man, he stole my line. And then Fred, he those that don't know, Fred, always humble to see you, brother. We both were in the street, and we came up. We used to go to Three Rivers together, and we would be in the bar. And I don't want to tell all your stuff. I don't want to get you fired or nothing. And we would be in the bar, and I said, Fred, man, you going to psychology tomorrow? Because we had a Saturday class. Oh, my God, it was the worst class ever. And we would show up in club clothes on Saturday morning, and we would be there. And today, to be humbled to hear him as a professor teaching at the same school, Come on, man. We're talking about the dream. We're talking about the dream. Dreams turn into goals where I'm from. But he left us with that Rip Van Winkle story. And I know by the hearing of the applause and the cheers, nobody is asleep here. We are awoken, but we need to move. We need to mobilize, meet somebody. Make sure you know somebody before you leave here today. Meet a black and brown person, meet a white person, and let's make this a movement. Let's go. Thank you.
Once again, help me welcome Ricarla Horsley, a soloist from St. John's Christian Church, singing Who You Say I Am by Hillsong Worship.
Who am I that the highest king would welcome me? I was lost and he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. The sun sets free. Oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me, whom the Son sets free. Oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. The sun sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I
Before I introduce the last speaker, I'd just like to say I grew up in Groton, and I always knew that it was a great place to live. But now that I've gotten involved and I've gotten to work closely with the staff of the town, I understand why it's a great place to live. It's because we have a staff that when a minority of our population says, we do not feel seen, there are problems that we need to be fixed, they come out and they put on an event like this saying, we see you. It's a beautiful thing to me that this event was put on by every department from the town. And I'd like to recognize all of them, but there's just too many. So I'll just single out one whose vision this was and did a lot of the behind the scenes logistics. That's Cindy Olson from our senior center. And it was a large group, but really, she was our leader, and I just want to thank her for that. Our last speaker is the Vice President of the Writers Block, Inc. Board of Directors. Please welcome Colton Harris.
Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Good. Wonderful to see you. All right. So I hope that you feel the weight and the gravity of this moment as we are in a historic moment. But I don't like to sit too much in history. I'm way more invested in legacy, and I hope that you are too. History is merely retelling. Legacy is living. And as we embark on this journey together, it's important that we understand that this moment is not meant to just be a moment, but through building relationships, we can overcome together. This day, we commemorate a historic event full of hope and revolution. As is custom to our soundbite culture, we only remember the headlines and fragments of the speech given by Dr. King. Popular culture loves to celebrate the imagery of unity. What is often forgotten is the centrality of the message, which has been diminished to hand-holding and a call for all of us to just get along. This remembrance does a disservice to the work of the civil rights leaders and activists who were calling for not only an ideological shift, but a systemic dismantling. Dr. King had a dream, but the time has come for us to wake up. The future he envisioned is muddled by the false claims to superiority and the politicization of human rights. This dissonance is ever present in our daily existence as many are trying to reconcile what they believe to be true about the nature of this country with its dark reality. We remember this day as though the victory has come, as though we have overcome. While reparations have yet to be paid and equity is still an elusive concept for many. The crisis of COVID-19 showed us how quickly our nation can respond to the threat against human lives, yet remain silent in the face of inequities facing Black people in this country, believing them to have magically faded a long time ago. Generations are present here who have heard the repeated phrase of that wasn't me. I didn't do that. I didn't say those things. So we shrug it off as though it's not our issue. We strengthen the antibodies in our immune system to fight against sickness and disease, yet to be anti-racist is deemed too strong of a concept. Keeping our eyes fixed on the past has caused our collective consciousness to be delusional about the progress we've made and not face the evils that are plaguing us in this present moment. We have a strong mythology of institutional purity that hinders us from acknowledging the corruption that is apparent in all of our systems and institutions. This makes us uncomfortable because we take it personally. Racism, oppression is not merely a social experiment. Institutions and systems that were built upon narratives, and every human being living understands that narratives are what drive us. The stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we pass down, narratives drive our behavior and our existence, which is why the retelling of our history is full of so many narrative errors that cause us to believe that we are not partakers in evil and corruption. When the evils are exposed, they are dismissed as an anomaly and not an indication of the poisonous roots that produce the very fruit we see before us. Oh, that was just one of them. This is not regular. This doesn't happen. And even though it happens again and again and again, we still refuse to acknowledge that maybe this entity, this system, is broken. Or if you look at the origins, you see that they're doing exactly what they were designed to do. Prisons were not meant to rehabilitate human beings. The fact that we still have solitary confinement in this country is due to the fact that we have a narrative that these institutions protect you and me from the bad people, when most of us have broken the same laws that those that are behind bars are suffering for. Welcome to 2020, the year of denial. Despite the evidence, our society feeds a willful ignorance. The idea of sharing power, resources, and tools is represented as an absurdity, as a threat to capitalism or democracy as we believe that we uphold it to be. Our inclination to attribute ideologies to various political parties prevents us from humanizing those that have been dehumanized for far too long. The fight can only begin when we agree on our collective enemies and sacrifice our agendas for control. Despite popular belief, the more we empower others, the more powerful we are as the human race. So it is okay for you to step aside. It's okay for you to build relationships and to build and invest in community. You don't have to have all of the answers. But the lie that we buy into is that the more I hold on to my power, the more powerful I am, when in fact you're limiting the possibilities that are ahead. So the work ahead is real. The work ahead is messy. It's going to take vigilance, discomfort, and love. But it has to start within ourselves and venture outward, as we've heard today. So let's take the lead and make the dream a living reality. I invite you to take part in a collective dream, one in which our hearts are softened by the cries of the hopeless, attuned to the pleas of the oppressed, and alive to a greater purpose than our own. So if you're here today, I would like to make a new proposition. Often we hear a lot about seats at the table. We just want a spot. I propose that we destroy the existing table and build a new one together. Thank you.
I just want to thank all of our speakers for coming out and putting on this great event for us. We obviously couldn't have done it without you. And everybody is welcome to stay out. We're going to be around until at least the sun sets, probably another 30 minutes. And just as Daryl said, meet some people and let's start a movement.